When a struggling single mother saves a stranger's life on the street, she has no idea he's a billionaire CEO or that this one moment of courage will change everything. But can love bridge the gap between two completely different worlds, or will society's cruel judgment tear them apart before they get their chance at happiness? The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through the thin walls of the cramped apartment at 4:30 a.m. But Clara Evans was already awake. She had been staring at the ceiling for the past hour, her mind racing through the impossible mathematics of survival rent, due in 3 days, the baby-needing formula, and exactly $17.43 sitting in her checking account. "Mama's got this, sweetheart," she whispered to the sleeping bundle in the makeshift crib beside her bed. Little Tommy, barely 8 months old, stirred slightly, his tiny fist curled around a worn, stuffed elephant that had seen better days. The elephant had been a gift from her mother before everything fell apart. Clara slipped out of bed, her bare feet silent on the cold linoleum floor. The apartment was a studio, if you could even call it that. More like a glorified closet with a hot plate and a dream. But it was theirs, and she'd fought tooth and nail to keep it that way. She pulled on her delivery uniform, a wrinkled polo shirt with "Quick Bite Express" embroidered on the pocket, the threads already starting to fray after just 6 months of wear. The irony wasn't lost on her that she spent her days delivering gourmet meals to people who probably spent more on lunch than she made in a week. The coffee maker gurgled to life, a second-hand treasure she'd found at a garage sale. As the bitter aroma filled the tiny space, Clara caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes, and her honey-blonde hair hung limp around her shoulders. At 24, she sometimes felt like she was aging in dog years. "You've got this," she told her reflection, practicing the smile she'd wear for customers. Just another day. But even as she said it, something heavy settled in her chest. The weight of endless tomorrows that looked exactly like today. The fear that this was it, that she'd never climb out of this hole she'd fallen into when Jake left, taking not just his promises, but half their savings, and every shred of her trust in happy endings. Tommy began to fuss, and Clara hurried to warm his bottle. As she fed him, she studied his perfect little face so much like his father's, it sometimes took her breath away. But where Jake had been selfish and weak, Tommy was pure innocence, depending on her for everything. "We're going to make it, baby boy," she murmured, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Mama's going to figure this out." By 5:15 a.m., she was bundling Tommy into his carrier, the diaper bag slung over her shoulder like armor. Mrs. Chen from next door would watch him during her morning shift, a godsend of a woman who refused to take payment, despite Clara's insistence. "He's an angel," Mrs. Chen always said in her broken English, her weathered hands gentle as she took the carrier. "No trouble at all." Clara kissed Tommy's forehead, breathing in his sweet baby scent. "I'll be back by noon, I promise." The delivery van was a beat-up Honda with over 200,000 miles and a temperamental engine that required exactly the right touch to start. Clara had become an expert at coaxing life from dying things. It seemed to be her specialty. The morning air was crisp autumn, painting the trees in brilliant oranges and reds that reminded her of better times. She had 17 deliveries on her route today, scattered across the city's most affluent neighborhoods. Each stop was a glimpse into lives she could barely imagine. Sprawling houses with manicured lawns, luxury cars in circular driveways, and people who tipped in cash without thinking twice about it. Her first delivery was to a penthouse downtown. As she rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, Clara practiced her professional demeanor. Smile, make eye contact, thank them for their business. Don't stare at the marble floors or the original artwork on the walls. "Good morning," she chirped to the woman who answered the door, a perfectly coiffed blonde in yoga pants that probably cost more than Clara's rent. "Order for Henderson." The woman barely looked at her, signing the receipt with a Mont Blanc pen and closing the door without a word. No tip. No acknowledgement that Clara was even human. "Have a wonderful day," Clara said to the closed door, her smile faltering. The morning continued in much the same pattern. Rich people, beautiful homes, and the growing realization that she was invisible to most of them. Just another service worker, interchangeable and forgettable. By 10 a.m., she was making her way through the financial district, the delivery vans struggling up the steep hills. The city's heartbeat was different here, faster, more intense. Men and women in expensive suits rushed past on sidewalks, their phones pressed to their ears, their faces set in expressions of grim determination. Clara was stopped at a red light, drumming her fingers on the steering wheel when she saw him. A man in a charcoal suit stood on the corner, one hand pressed to his chest, the other reaching out as if grasping for something just out of reach. For a moment, Clara thought he was hailing a taxi. Then she saw his face, pale, contorted in pain, and watched in horror as he crumpled to the sidewalk like a marionette with severed strings. The light turned green. Cars honked behind her. The world kept moving, but the man on the sidewalk wasn't moving at all. "Oh, God," Clara breathed, yanking the wheel to the right and pulling into a loading zone. She threw the van into park and grabbed the first aid kit she kept in the glove compartment, a habit from her brief stint as a nursing student, before life derailed those dreams too. The sidewalk was chaos. People streamed around the fallen man, like water around a stone, some pausing to look, most hurrying past. A few had their phones out, but Clara realized with sick certainty that they were filming, not calling for help. "Someone call 911, she shouted, dropping to her knees beside the man. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. Clara checked for a pulse, weak and thready. His lips were taking on a bluish tinge that made her stomach clench with recognition. "Sir, can you hear me?" she called gently, shaking his shoulder. No response. Around her, the crowd grew larger, but no more helpful. Voices buzzed with speculation and excitement, but no one else was taking action. "Did someone call an ambulance?" Clara demanded, looking up at the circle of faces. "I think someone did," a teenager said uncertainly, his phone still recording. "You think—" Clara's voice cracked with frustration. "Call 911 now." She turned back to the man, her hands shaking as she tilted his head back and checked his airway. Clear. But his breathing was becoming more labored, and that bluish tinge was spreading. Heart attack. It had to be. Clara's nursing training kicked in, muscle memory overriding her panic. She positioned her hands on his chest, fingers interlaced, and began compressions. 30 pumps, hard and fast, just like she'd practiced on countless dummies in school. "Come on," she whispered between compressions. "Don't you dare give up." She tilted his head back, pinched his nose, and gave 2 rescue breaths. His chest rose and fell. Back to compressions. 1, 2, 3. She counted under her breath, sweat beading on her forehead, despite the cool morning air. The man beneath her hands was probably in his early 30s, with dark hair and strong features. Even unconscious, there was something commanding about him, something that spoke of power and authority. His suit was impeccably tailored, his watch the kind that cost more than most people's cars. But right now, he was just a human being whose heart had stopped, and Clara was the only thing standing between him and death. "Please," she whispered, pumping his chest with everything she had. "Please don't die on me." Her arms were beginning to ache, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. In this moment, nothing else existed, not her empty bank account, not her uncertain future, Not the crowd of onlookers treating this like entertainment. Just her hands and his heart, and the desperate hope that she could somehow bridge the gap between them. "Where's the ambulance?" someone called out. "Traffic's backed up," another voice replied. "Could be 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Clara's heart sank. CPR could only do so much for so long. She gave him 2 more breaths and returned to compressions, her movements becoming more desperate. "Come on, come on, come on!" And then, like a miracle, she felt it the faintest flutter beneath her palms. His heart struggling back to life. "That's it." She breathed, tears streaming down her face. "That's it, keep fighting." His eyelids fluttered. A groan escaped his lips. The crowd around them gasped and cheered like they were watching a movie, but Clara barely heard them. All her attention was focused on the man slowly returning to consciousness, his dark eyes unfocused but alive, so beautifully alive. "Hey," she said softly, her hand moving to cradle his face. "You're okay. You're going to be okay." He tried to speak, but only a whisper emerged. Clara leaned closer, her ear nearly touching his lips. "Thank you." He breathed the words barely audible. And in that moment, something shifted in Clara's chest, not unlike the flutter of a heart starting to beat again. She didn't know his name, didn't know anything about him except that he was alive because she had refused to let him die. But as she looked into his grateful eyes, she felt a connection spark between them, fragile as gossamer, but somehow stronger than steel. The wail of sirens finally cut through the urban noise, growing louder as the ambulance approached. The crowd began to disperse, their entertainment over, but Clara stayed by his side until the paramedics took over. "You saved his life," one of them told her as they loaded him onto a stretcher. "He's lucky you were here." Lucky. As Clara watched the ambulance disappear into traffic, she wondered if luck had anything to do with it. Maybe it was fate that had put her on this street corner at exactly the right moment. Maybe everything, the broken dreams, the financial struggles, even Jake's betrayal, had led her here for a reason. She walked back to her delivery van on unsteady legs, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline. A parking ticket fluttered on her windshield, $45 she didn't have for saving a man's life. But as she crumpled the ticket and shoved it in her pocket, Clara found herself smiling. For the first time in months, she felt like she mattered, like she had made a real difference in the world. She had no idea that the man she'd saved was Daniel Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries, and one of the wealthiest men in the city. She didn't know that he would spend the next few days in the hospital thinking about her gentle hands and fierce determination. She couldn't have imagined that he would move heaven and earth to find her driven by a gratitude that was already transforming into something deeper. All Clara knew was that she had looked death in the face and won, and for a woman who had been losing at everything else, that felt like the most important victory of her life. As she drove to her next delivery, her reflection in the rearview mirror looked different somehow. The same tired eyes, the same worried lines around her mouth, but underneath it all, a new light, the glow of someone who had remembered what she was capable of when it truly mattered. The rest of her route passed in a blur of wealthy neighborhoods and indifferent customers, but Clara's mind kept drifting back to those dark eyes and whispered thanks. She wondered if he would remember her once he fully recovered, or if she would just become another blurry detail in what was probably the worst day of his life. She had no way of knowing that across town, Daniel Whitmore was lying in a hospital bed, his fingers unconsciously tracing the spot on his chest, where her hands had brought him back to life, and making a promise to himself that he would find the angel who had saved him, no matter what it took. The story was just beginning, and neither of them could have imagined where it would lead. But sometimes the most beautiful chapters start with the most ordinary moments, a red light, a fallen stranger, and a choice to stop when the rest of the world keeps moving. Sometimes love begins with learning how to make a heartbeat again. 3 days had passed since that moment on the sidewalk, and Clara found herself thinking about the stranger at the oddest times while folding Tommy's tiny clothes during her morning deliveries in those quiet moments before sleep, when her mind refused to settle. She wondered if he had fully recovered, if he even remembered her face, or if the whole encounter had dissolved into the hazy blur that trauma often left behind. What she didn't know was that Daniel Whitmore had been lying in his private hospital suite, staring at the ceiling and thinking about her every waking moment. "Mr. Whitmore," Dr. Harrison said, checking his chart for the third time that morning. "Your heart rhythm has stabilized completely. All your tests are coming back normal. You're cleared to go home." Daniel nodded absently, his fingers still unconsciously tracing the spot on his chest, where her hands had pressed life back into him. "Doctor, the woman who helped me, do you know anything about her?" Dr. Harrison's eyebrows lifted slightly. "I'm afraid not. The paramedics mentioned a good Samaritan, but by the time we arrived, she was gone. Why do you ask? I need to thank her properly." Daniel's voice was quiet but determined. "She saved my life. I'm sure she knows that. Sometimes people don't need recognition, they just need to know they made a difference." But Daniel couldn't let it go. As his driver pulled up to the hospital entrance in the familiar black sedan, Daniel made a decision that would change everything. "Marcus," he said to his longtime driver and trusted friend, "I need you to take me back to where it happened. Corner of 5th and Market." Marcus glanced at him in the rearview mirror, concern creasing his weathered face. "Sir, perhaps you should rest. Please." The word came out rougher than Daniel intended. "I need to see it again." The corner looked different in the afternoon light, bustling with the usual crowd of office workers and tourists. Daniel stood where he had fallen, trying to piece together fragments of memory. Her voice urgent and determined. Her hands steady despite the chaos around them. The way she had looked at him when he first opened his eyes, like he was the most important person in the world. "Excuse me," he said to a hot dog vendor who was setting up his cart nearby. "Were you here Monday morning around 10? The vendor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, nodded slowly. "You're the guy who collapsed, aren't you? Scared the hell out of everyone. The woman who helped me, do you remember her? Lady with the delivery van, sure do. She didn't hesitate for a second, just jumped right in. Most people were just standing around with their phones out, but she knew what she was doing." The vendor shook his head admiringly. "Don't see that kind of courage much anymore." A delivery van. Daniel's heart quickened. "Do you remember what company?" "Quick Bite something. Had a logo on the side." The vendor studied Daniel's face. "You trying to find her?" "Yes." "Well, she comes through here sometimes. Seen that van a few times this week, actually. Always around lunchtime." Daniel felt something loosen in his chest, hope maybe, or just the relief of having a lead. "Thank you. Thank you so much." That afternoon, Daniel did something he hadn't done in years. He canceled his meetings, ignored his assistant's increasingly frantic calls, and sat in a cafe across from the corner where his life had changed, waiting and waiting. And then at 12:47 p.m. he saw her. The van was just as the vendor had described, a beat-up Honda with Quick Bite Express painted on the side in fading letters. Through the windshield he caught a glimpse of honey-blonde hair and recognized the determined set of her shoulders as she navigated through traffic. Daniel's hands shook as he threw money on the table and rushed outside, but by the time he reached the street, the van had disappeared around a corner. He stood there, breathing hard, feeling like a man who had just missed his salvation by seconds. "Marcus," he called, pulling out his phone. "I need you to find out everything you can about Quick Bite Express. Addresses, routes, employee records, everything. Sir, just do it, please. It took Marcus exactly 4 hours to track down the information Daniel needed. Quick Bite Express was a small delivery service operating out of a converted warehouse on the east side of the city. They employed 12 drivers, and only 3 of them were women. Of those 3, only one matched the general description Daniel could provide. Clara Evans, 24 years old, single mother. No college degree listed, but there was a notation about incomplete nursing school coursework. Daniel stared at the sparse file Marcus had compiled, feeling like he was holding pieces of a puzzle he desperately wanted to solve. Clara Evans. Even her name was beautiful. "Would you like me to arrange a meeting, sir?" Marcus asked carefully. "No." Daniel's response was immediate. "No, I want to do this right. I don't want to overwhelm her or make her uncomfortable." What he didn't say was that he was terrified she might reject his gratitude, might want nothing to do with the complication he represented. Rich men saying thank you often came with strings attached, and something told him Clara Evans was smart enough to know that. So Daniel did something completely unprecedented. He went to her. The next morning, he traded his usual Armani suit for jeans and a simple sweater, left his driver at home, and took a cab to the neighborhood where Clara lived. It was a world away from his penthouse narrow streets, lined with aging apartment buildings, corner bodegas with hand-painted signs, children playing on stoops, while their mothers called to them in Spanish and English, and languages he couldn't identify. He found the cafe 3 blocks from her apartment building, a tiny place called Luna's, with mismatched tables, and the kind of authentic atmosphere that couldn't be bought or manufactured. The elderly woman behind the counter looked at him with curious eyes as he ordered coffee and positioned himself at a table near the window. "You waiting for someone, mijo?" she asked, her accent warm and musical. "I hope so," Daniel replied honestly. He waited for 2 hours before she appeared, and when she did, his breath caught in his throat. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, but it was a tired beauty worn thin by struggle and responsibility. She pushed a stroller with one hand while balancing a paper sack of groceries in the other, her face set in the determined expression of someone who had learned to expect life to be difficult. Daniel watched her pause outside the cafe, checking her phone with a frown. Through the window, he could see her counting bills from her wallet, her lips moving silently as she calculated. After a moment, she shook her head and started to walk past. He was outside before he could think better of it. "Excuse me." Clara turned, and when her eyes met his, Daniel saw the exact moment recognition dawned. Her face went through a series of emotions, surprise, confusion, and something that might have been fear. "You're—" she began, then stopped, her grip tightening on the stroller handle. "The man you saved," Daniel finished softly. "My name is Daniel." She stared at him for a long moment, and he could practically see her mind racing. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to thank you properly." He gestured toward the cafe. Would you let me buy you coffee? I promise I'm not some kind of stalker. I just needed to see you again." Clara's eyes flicked to the cafe window, then back to his face. "I can't really afford—" "My treat," Daniel said quickly. "Please, I owe you much more than coffee." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because after another moment of hesitation, she nodded. "Okay, but just for a few minutes." Inside the cafe, Daniel helped her maneuver the stroller to a corner table, while the elderly woman who introduced herself as Maria cooed over the baby. "Que hermoso!" Maria exclaimed gently, touching Tommy's cheek. "How old is this little angel?" 8 months. Clara replied, her smile transforming her entire face. His name is Tommy. Daniel watched the interaction, struck by how Clara's whole demeanor softened when people admired her son. The defensive walls came down, replaced by pure maternal pride. 2 coffees, Daniel told Maria, and whatever pastries you recommend. I really can't let you, Clara began, but Daniel held up a hand. Please, you literally saved my life. The least I can do is buy you a Cuban sandwich. Clara studied his face, and Daniel found himself holding his breath, waiting for her verdict. Finally, she gave a small nod. Okay, thank you. They sat in relative silence while Maria bustled around behind the counter preparing their order. Tommy babbled happily in his stroller, grabbing at a set of plastic keys that jingled softly. Daniel found himself mesmerized by the baby's bright eyes and infectious smile. He's beautiful, Daniel said softly. He's everything, Clara replied, and the simple honesty in her voice made Daniel's chest tighten. Maria brought their food, Cuban sandwiches still warm from the press and coffee that smelled like heaven. Clara took a tentative bite, and Daniel watched her eyes close briefly in appreciation. This is incredible, she murmured. Maria makes the best Cuban food this side of Havana, Daniel agreed. I discovered this place by accident, and now I come here whenever I need to remember what real food tastes like. Clara raised an eyebrow. As opposed to fake food? Daniel laughed, a sound that surprised him with its genuineness. You'd be amazed how much fake food there is when you spend most of your time at business dinners and charity galas. Everything's either molecular gastronomy or artisanal something or other. Sometimes you just want a sandwich that tastes like someone's grandmother made it. So you're... Clara hesitated, then seemed to decide to be direct. You're rich. Yes. Daniel met her eyes steadily. Does that bother you? Clara was quiet for a moment, considering. I don't know yet. Depends on what kind of rich you are. What kind are there? The kind who thinks money makes them better than everyone else, and the kind who knows it just makes them luckier. Clara took another bite of her sandwich. Which one are you? Daniel found himself genuinely thinking about the question. I used to think I was the second kind. Now I'm not so sure I know the difference. Something shifted in Clara's expression, a softening around her eyes, that told Daniel he'd given the right answer, or at least an honest one. So, she said, how are you feeling? I mean physically. No more chest pains or anything. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. The doctors said if you hadn't acted as quickly as you did. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. But I did act. And you're okay. That's what matters. Daniel studied her face, struck by how matter-of-factly she spoke about saving his life, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Where did you learn CPR? A shadow crossed Clara's features. I was in nursing school for a while. Before... She glanced at Tommy, and Daniel understood without her having to explain. Do you miss it, nursing? Clara's smile was wistful. Every day. But life doesn't always go according to plan, you know. No, Daniel said quietly, thinking of his own derailed dreams. It doesn't. They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that felt natural rather than awkward. Tommy had fallen asleep in his stroller, one tiny fist curled around his stuffed elephant. Daniel found himself studying the baby's peaceful face, wondering what it would be like to have someone depend on you so completely. Can I ask you something? Clara said suddenly. Anything. What were you doing on that corner? I mean, it's not exactly a neighborhood where I'd expect to see someone like you. Daniel paused, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. I was walking to a meeting. I do that sometimes when I need to think instead of taking the car. Probably saved my life, actually, If I'd been in the back seat of a sedan, you never would have seen me collapse." "Fate," Clara murmured. "You believe in that?" "I have to. Otherwise nothing makes sense." Clara traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. "I almost didn't take that route yesterday. There was construction on my usual street, so I had to detour. If I'd been 5 minutes earlier or later, I would have died," Daniel finished. Their eyes met across the small table, and Daniel felt that same spark he'd experienced on the sidewalk, a connection that defied logic or explanation. Clara must have felt it too, because she looked away first, her cheeks flushing pink. "I should probably get going," she said, reaching for her purse. "Tommy will be cranky if his nap schedule gets messed up." "Of course." Daniel stood as she began maneuvering the stroller away from the table. "Clara." She paused, looking back at him. "Would it be okay if I came by again sometime? I mean, I'd like to return the favor somehow. Buy you dinner or—" "You don't owe me anything," Clara interrupted, but her tone was gentle. "Maybe not. But I'd like to see you again anyway." Clara studied his face for a long moment, and Daniel held his breath, waiting. Finally, she gave a small nod. "I come here sometimes. Tuesday afternoons when I can manage it." It wasn't quite an invitation, but it wasn't a rejection either. Daniel felt his heart do something that might have been a skip. "Tuesday afternoons. I'll remember that." Clara pushed the stroller toward the door, then paused again. "Daniel." "Yes, I'm glad you're okay." And then she was gone, leaving Daniel sitting alone in the cafe with the lingering scent of her perfume and the feeling that his world had shifted on its axis once again. Maria appeared at his elbow, refilling his coffee cup with a knowing smile. "She's special, that one." "Yes," Daniel agreed softly. "She is. You be careful with her, mijo. She's been hurt before I can see it in her eyes. But underneath all that hurt, there's a good heart. The kind worth fighting for." Daniel nodded, understanding that this elderly woman was giving him both a blessing and a warning. "I will be. Careful, I mean." "Good." Maria patted his shoulder with a weathered hand. "And you come back Tuesday, see, she needs friends. Good friends." As Daniel left the cafe and walked back toward his own world of glass towers and corporate boardrooms, he found himself counting the days until Tuesday. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he had something to look forward to that had nothing to do with profit margins or quarterly reports. He had Clara Evans to look forward to. And somehow, that made all the difference. The following Tuesday, Daniel arrived at Luna's an hour early, choosing the same corner table and ordering the same Cuban sandwich. When Clara appeared at exactly 2:30, pushing Tommy's stroller and looking slightly frazzled, Daniel felt his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with his recent cardiac episode. "You came?" she said, and he caught the note of surprise in her voice. "I said I would." Clara settled into the chair across from him, and Daniel noticed she looked tired. More tired than before, if that was possible. "Rough day?" he asked gently. Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You could say that. The van broke down this morning and I had to spend my grocery money on repairs. Then Tommy decided to have a meltdown in the middle of the pharmacy while I was trying to pick up his prescription, and some woman actually told me I should control my child better." She shook her head. "Sorry. You probably don't want to hear about my problems." "I asked," Daniel pointed out. "And for what it's worth, that woman was an idiot. Tommy's a baby's cry. It's literally their job." Clara's smile was grateful but weary. "Tell that to everyone who stares at me like I'm the worst mother in the world when he gets fussy in public." Daniel felt a surge of protective anger on her behalf. Anyone who judges a mother doing her best is showing their own character, not yours. Something in his tone made Clara look at him more closely. You sound like you know something about judgment. More than I'd like to, Daniel signaled to Maria for their usual order. Want to talk about something more pleasant? Like what? Tell me about Tommy. What's he like? Besides beautiful, I mean. Clara's entire demeanor brightened, and Daniel realized he'd found the magic key to her happiness. He's amazing, so curious about everything. He just learned to clap, and now he does it constantly. And he laughs at everything, especially when I make silly faces at him during diaper changes. What about you? What were you like as a baby? According to my mom, I was stubborn from day one. She used to say I came out arguing with the doctor. Clara's expression grew wistful. She would have loved Tommy so much. Would have. She died when I was 20. Cancer. Clara's voice was matter-of-fact, but Daniel could hear the old pain underneath. It's just been me and Tommy since his father decided fatherhood wasn't for him. Daniel felt his jaw clench. I'm sorry. About your mother, and about Tommy's father being an idiot. Clara's eyebrows rose. That's the second time you've called someone an idiot on my behalf. You barely know me. I know enough. Daniel met her eyes steadily. I know you're brave enough to save a stranger's life. I know you're devoted to your son. I know you work multiple jobs to provide for him. I know you're kind to elderly cafe owners and patient with cranky babies. What else do I need to know? Clara stared at him, and Daniel watched emotions flicker across her face, surprise, gratitude, and something that might have been longing. You don't know that I dropped out of nursing school, she said quietly. You don't know that I made terrible choices in men. You don't know that sometimes I lie awake at night wondering if I'm completely screwing up my son's life because I can barely afford to keep us fed and housed. Those aren't character flaws, Clara. Those are circumstances. Daniel leaned forward, his voice intense. You made sacrifices for your child. You're working yourself to the bone to give him a good life. That doesn't make you a failure. It makes you a hero. Tears gathered in Clara's eyes, and she looked away quickly. You don't understand. You couldn't possibly understand what it's like to feel like you're drowning and everyone else is just watching from the shore. Daniel interrupted softly. To feel like no matter how hard you try, you're always one step behind. To wonder if you're strong enough to keep going. Clara's gaze snapped back to his, and in her eyes Daniel saw recognition. How could you possibly? Because I felt that way every day for 3 years after my parents died, Daniel said simply. Different circumstances, same feeling. I inherited a company I wasn't ready to run with a board of directors who thought I was too young and too inexperienced. I had employees depending on me, shareholders watching my every move, and absolutely no idea what I was doing. Some nights I would sit in my office at 3 a.m, wondering if everyone would be better off if I just disappeared. But you didn't. No, I learned something that maybe you need to hear too. Daniel reached across the table and gently covered her hand with his. Surviving isn't the same as living, but sometimes surviving is enough. Sometimes just getting through the day is a victory worth celebrating. Clara stared down at their joined hands, and Daniel felt the moment when she stopped pulling away and let herself accept the comfort he was offering. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me, really seeing me. Most people just see the struggling single mom and assume that's all there is. Their loss, Daniel said firmly. You're extraordinary, Clara Evans. You just can't see it yet. They sat in comfortable silence, Daniel's hand still covering hers, until Tommy began to stir in his stroller. Clara reluctantly pulled away to tend to her son, but Daniel caught the small smile on her lips and felt like he'd won something precious. Over the following weeks, Tuesday afternoons at Luna's became the highlight of Daniel's week. He learned that Clara's favorite color was sage green, that she'd wanted to be a pediatric nurse, and that she sang lullabies in a voice so beautiful it made his chest ache. She learned that Daniel had taught himself to cook after his parents died, that he read mystery novels when he couldn't sleep, and that he'd never felt more alone than when he was surrounded by hundreds of people at charity galas. Slowly, carefully, they built something that felt dangerously close to friendship. And if Daniel sometimes caught himself thinking about Clara at inappropriate moments during board meetings, if he found himself looking forward to Tuesday with an intensity that bordered on desperate, well, that was something he kept to himself. For now. 3 months of Tuesday afternoons had woven themselves into the fabric of both their lives, creating a rhythm as natural as breathing. Daniel found himself scheduling board meetings around those sacred hours, and Clara began looking forward to them and with an anticipation that both thrilled and terrified her. What had started as gratitude had evolved into something neither of them dared to name, though it hummed between them, like electricity every time their eyes met across Maria's small cafe table. It was on a particularly cold Tuesday in late February when everything changed. Clara arrived 20 minutes late, her face flushed from the wind and something that looked like panic. Tommy was fussing in his stroller, and her usual composed demeanor had cracked just enough for Daniel to see the desperation underneath. "I'm sorry," she said breathlessly, collapsing into her chair. "I almost didn't come at all." Daniel immediately signaled Maria for coffee and Clara's usual sandwich, his attention focused entirely on the woman across from him. "What happened?" Clara laughed, but it came out brittle and sharp. "Everything. Everything happened at once, like the universe decided I was getting too comfortable and needed a reminder of my place." She pulled a crumpled envelope from her purse and slapped it on the table between them. Daniel could see it was from a law firm, and his stomach dropped. "Tommy's father wants custody," Clara said, her voice hollow. "Partial custody anyway. Apparently he's gotten married to someone with money, and they've decided they want to play house with my son." Daniel felt a surge of protective rage so intense it surprised him. Can he do that? Just show up after 8 months and demand rights? According to this letter, yes, he can. Clara's hands shook as she reached for her coffee. "His new wife is a lawyer, apparently. They're claiming I'm an unfit mother because I'm financially unstable and unable to provide adequate care. That's insane. You're an incredible mother." "Am I?" Clara's voice cracked. "Because looking at my life objectively, Daniel, maybe they have a point. I live in a studio apartment that's barely bigger than most people's closets. I work multiple jobs just to scrape by. Tommy wears second-hand clothes and plays with toys I find at garage sales. Maybe he would be better off with—" "Stop." Daniel's voice was sharp enough to cut through her spiral. "Don't you dare finish that sentence. Tommy is loved, Clara. He's happy and healthy and adored. No amount of money can buy what you give him every single day." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks and she wiped them away angrily. "Love doesn't pay for college funds or health insurance or... It pays for everything that actually matters." Daniel reached across the table and took her hands in both of his. "Clara, look at me. Tommy lights up when he sees you. He reaches for you when he's scared. He laughs at your silly faces and falls asleep to your lullabies. That's not something money can create or replace. But what if the court doesn't see it that way? What if they look at Jake's big house and steady income and decide that's what's best for Tommy? Clara's voice was getting smaller, more frightened. I can't lose him, Daniel. He's all I have. He's everything. Daniel felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. Looking at Clara's tear-stained face, at the terror in her green eyes, he made a decision that felt both completely rational and utterly insane. Marry me. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them had expected to appear. Clara stared at him, her mouth slightly open, coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. What did you just say? Marry me. Daniel repeated, his voice steadier now that the words were out. Not for love or romance or any of the usual reasons. Marry me for Tommy, for security, for the kind of legal protection that money can buy. Clara set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. Daniel, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. Think about it, Clara. If you're married to me, Jake's argument about financial instability disappears overnight. Tommy would have the best health care, the best education, every advantage money can provide. And more importantly, he'd have you, his real mother, the woman who loves him more than life itself. But you don't love me, Clara whispered, and something in her voice made Daniel's chest tighten. And I don't love you. Not like that. We're friends, Daniel. Good friends, but so we'll be friends who are married. People have built lasting relationships on less. Daniel's voice was gentle but determined. Clara, I care about you. I care about Tommy. I want to help, and this is the best way I know how. Clara was quiet for a long moment, staring down at their joined hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Why would you do this? What could you possibly get out of it? Daniel considered lying, giving her some noble answer about wanting to help. But Clara deserved honesty, especially now. Because for the first time in years, I feel like I matter to someone, he said quietly. My whole life is board meetings and profit margins and people who only care about what I can do for them. But when I'm with you and Tommy, I feel like a real person. Like Daniel, not just the CEO of Whitmore Industries. Daniel, I'm not asking you to love me, Clara. I'm asking you to let me help you keep your son. Everything else we can figure out as we go. Clara pulled her hands free and stood abruptly, pacing to the window, where she could watch Tommy sleeping peacefully in his stroller. Daniel waited, his heart hammering against his ribs, while she wrestled with the impossible choice he'd just handed her. This is crazy, she said finally, not turning around. Maybe, but crazy might be exactly what we need. Clara turned back to face him, and Daniel saw the exact moment when desperation overrode every rational objection she might have had. If we did this, she said slowly, it would have to be a real marriage. Legally, I mean. Jake's lawyer would tear apart any arrangement that looked fake or temporary. I understand. And Tommy comes first. Always. In every decision, in every situation, he's the priority. I wouldn't have it any other way. Clara took a shaky breath. How would we? Where would we live? What would people think, your business associates, your friends? We'd live wherever you're comfortable. My penthouse, your apartment somewhere new, entirely your choice. As for what people think, Daniel shrugged. Let them think whatever they want. The only opinions that matter are yours, mine, and Tommy's. Tommy's too young to have opinions about marriage, but not too young to benefit from stability. Daniel stood and moved to where she was standing by the window. Clara, I know this is overwhelming. I know it's not the proposal you probably dreamed about when you were a little girl, but it could work. We could make it work. Clara looked down at her sleeping son, her expression a complex mix of love and terror. What if we try this and it's a disaster? What if we end up hating each other? What if we don't? Daniel interrupted gently. What if we figure out how to be a family, even if it's not a traditional one? What if Tommy gets to grow up feeling secure and loved by both of us? Both of us, Clara repeated quietly, and Daniel heard the longing in her voice. Both of us, he confirmed. I may not be his biological father, but I could be something like it, if you'll let me. Clara closed her eyes, and Daniel watched her internal struggle play out across her features. When she opened them again, there was a new resolve in her gaze. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Yes, I'll marry you. The words came out in a rush, as if she was afraid she'd lose her nerve if she said them too slowly. But I have conditions. Name them. This marriage is about Tommy's security, nothing else. We're friends and roommates, not husband and wife in the traditional sense. Separate bedrooms, separate lives outside of what we need to show the world. Daniel nodded, ignoring the small stab of disappointment in his chest. Agreed. And if either of us meets someone else, someone we actually love, we discuss it honestly. No sneaking around, no lies. Of course. The thought of Clara falling in love with someone else made Daniel's stomach churn, but he kept his expression neutral. And we tell Tommy the truth when he's old enough to understand. I won't build this family on lies. I think that's wise. Clara took a deep breath. Then yes, Daniel Whitmore. I'll marry you. Daniel felt a smile spread across his face, and for a moment the practical nature of their arrangement was forgotten. We're really going to do this. We're really going to do this, Clara confirmed, and then she was laughing and crying at the same time. Oh God, what are we doing? Something crazy, something brave, something that's going to work out perfectly. Daniel pulled her into a hug, and for just a moment, Clara let herself relax against his chest. I hope you're right, she murmured into his sweater. I am, Daniel said, and surprised himself by meaning it completely. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal preparations and wedding planning. Daniel's lawyer, Richard Hammond, had initially looked at him like he'd lost his mind when Daniel explained the situation. You want to marry a woman you've known for 3 months to help her win a custody battle? Richard had asked, his silver eyebrows nearly disappearing into his hairline. That's a gross oversimplification, but essentially yes. Daniel, there are other ways to help her. Financial support, legal representation. She won't accept charity, and this way Tommy gets permanent security, not just temporary help. Daniel had leaned back in his chair, his decision already made. Draw up the papers, Richard. Prenup, marriage license, whatever we need. What about a background check, financial disclosure? Daniel, you barely know this woman. I know everything I need to know. Richard had sighed deeply, but began pulling files from his cabinet. Fine, but I'm documenting my objections to this entire plan. Clara, meanwhile, was dealing with her own doubts and the well-meaning interference of Mrs. Chen, who had become something of a surrogate grandmother to Tommy. You sure about this, mija? The older woman had asked, bouncing Tommy on her hip, while Clara packed her few belongings. Marriage is not something to rush into. It's complicated, Mrs. Chen, but Daniel is a good man, and this is what's best for Tommy. Good men are rare, Mrs. Chen had agreed, studying Clara's face carefully. But love is rarer. You sure there's no love hiding in this complicated situation? Clara had paused in her packing, a small smile playing at her lips. I care about him, more than I expected to. But this isn't about love, it's about family. Sometimes those are the same thing, they just look different than we expect. The wedding itself was small and private, held in Judge Morrison's chambers, with only Richard, Mrs. Chen, and baby Tommy as witnesses. Clara wore a simple cream-colored dress she'd found at a consignment shop, and Daniel wore a navy suit that probably cost more than she'd made in the past 6 months. As they stood before the judge reciting vows that felt both surreal and surprisingly meaningful, Daniel found himself studying Clara's profile. She was nervous, he could see it in the slight tremor of her hands and the way she kept glancing at Tommy in Mrs. Chen's arms. But she was also beautiful and brave and about to become his wife. "Do you, Daniel Whitmore, take Clara Evans to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" "I do," Daniel said, and meant it more than he'd expected to. "Do you, Clara Evans, take Daniel Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper, but it was steady. "I do. By the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Daniel looked at Clara, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in her eyes. Then gently, he leaned down and pressed a soft, chaste kiss to her lips. It lasted only a moment, but Daniel felt something shift between them, a door opening to possibilities neither of them had dared to consider. When they broke apart, Clara's cheeks were pink, and Daniel found himself reluctant to step away from her. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore," Judge Morrison said with a warm smile. "I wish you both every happiness." Mrs. Whitmore. Clara was now Mrs. Whitmore, and the reality of what they'd just done hit Daniel like a physical force. They were married. Actually, legally married. Tommy chose that moment to let out a happy squeal from Mrs. Chen's arms, as if he approved of the proceedings, and everyone laughed. "I think he likes the idea," Clara said softly, reaching for her son. "Smart kid," Daniel replied, and was rewarded with one of Clara's genuine smiles. The penthouse apartment that was now their home felt enormous after Clara's tiny studio. Daniel had spent the week before the wedding having it baby-proofed and purchasing everything Tommy might need: a crib, high-chair toys, clothes in multiple sizes, because he wasn't sure what 8-month-olds wore. "This is all too much," Clara had protested when she saw the nursery Daniel had set up, complete with a mural of friendly farm animals and a rocking chair positioned perfectly by the window. "It's not too much if it makes Tommy happy," Daniel had replied, watching, as Clara ran her fingers over the crib's polished rails. "And this is really okay. Me being here, Tommy crying at night, the general chaos that comes with babies." Daniel had turned to face her fully. "Clara, this is your home now, both of yours. I want you to be comfortable here. It's just so different from what I'm used to." Different can be good. "And if there's anything you need, anything at all, just tell me." That first night, Daniel had lain awake in his master bedroom listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Clara getting Tommy ready for bed down the hall. Her soft voice singing lullabies, the creak of the rocking chair, the gentle shush shush as she soothed him to sleep. It was domestic and peaceful and completely foreign to his usual solitary evenings. Around midnight, Tommy had started crying, and Daniel had heard Clara's footsteps on the hardwood floor as she went to comfort him. The crying had continued for nearly an hour, and Daniel had found himself wondering if he should offer to help, if that would be overstepping, if Clara would want his interference. Eventually, silence had returned, but Daniel had remained awake much longer, staring at the ceiling and wondering what he'd gotten himself into. The custody hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after the wedding, and Jake's reaction to Clara's new marital status had been explosive. "You married him," Jake had shouted into the phone when Clara called to inform him of the change in circumstances. Some rich guy you barely know. What kind of mother does that? The kind who will do anything to protect her son. Clara had replied calmly, though Daniel could see her hands shaking as she held the phone. This is obviously a sham marriage, Clara. No court is going to be fooled by this. Actually, it's a completely legal marriage. We have the certificate to prove it. I'll fight this. My lawyer says, your lawyer can say whatever she wants. The fact remains that Tommy is happy, healthy, and living in a stable home with 2 parents who love him. 2 parents. You think this guy actually loves Tommy? He doesn't even know him. Daniel had taken the phone from Clara's hands, his jaw tight with anger. Jake, this is Daniel Whitmore, Clara's husband. Listen, you. No, you listen. Daniel had interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. I don't know what kind of man walks away from his child and then tries to take him away from the mother who's sacrificed everything for him, but I know what kind of man I am. I'm the kind who will fight for his family, and Clara and Tommy are my family now. You can't just buy your way into fatherhood. I'm not buying anything. I'm earning it. Every day by being here, by showing up, by putting Tommy's needs before my own. You should try it sometime. Daniel had hung up without waiting for a response, and when he'd turned around, Clara had been looking at him with something that might have been awe. Thank you, she'd whispered. You don't need to thank me for defending our family. Our family. The words had hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to explore. The custody hearing itself was a nightmare of legal jargon and character assassination. Jake's lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Hawthorne, had painted Clara as an opportunistic gold digger who had trapped a wealthy man into marriage for financial gain. Your Honor, she had argued, this so-called marriage is clearly a desperate attempt to appear more financially stable than she actually is. Mr. Whitmore and my client's ex-girlfriend have known each other for less than 4 months. No rational person enters into marriage after such a brief acquaintance unless there are ulterior motives involved. Daniel's lawyer had countered by presenting evidence of Clara's devoted motherhood, her work ethic, and the stability she'd provided Tommy since birth. They had character witnesses, Mrs. Chen Maria from the cafe, even Dr. Harrison, who testified that Clara had literally saved Daniel's life. But it was Daniel's own testimony that had been the most powerful. Your Honor, he had said, standing to address the court. I didn't marry Clara for her money because she doesn't have any. I didn't marry her because she was pregnant with my child, because Tommy isn't biologically mine. I married her because in the 3 months I've known her, she has shown me what real strength looks like. She works multiple jobs to provide for her son. She sings to him when he's scared. She stays up all night when he's sick. She teaches him to be kind and brave and good. That's not the behavior of an unfit mother, that's the behavior of a hero. Daniel had paused, his eyes finding Clara's across the courtroom. And Tommy isn't just lucky to have her as a mother. I'm lucky to have them both as my family. Because that's what we are now, a family. Not traditional maybe, but real. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure Tommy knows how loved and wanted he is. The judge had deliberated for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. When she returned, her expression was stern, but not unkind. This court has reviewed all the evidence presented, and I have to say this is one of the more unusual cases I've presided over. However, the law is clear about what constitutes the best interests of the child. Clara had gripped Daniel's hand so tightly, he'd lost feeling in his fingers. While Mr. Patterson certainly has rights as Tommy's biological father, the judge had continued, those rights must be balanced against the child's need for stability and continuity. Tommy has been in his mother's care since birth. He knows no other primary caregiver. To disrupt that relationship now would be traumatic for the child. Jake had started to object, but his lawyer had silenced him with a sharp look. Furthermore, the judge had said, Mrs. Whitmore has clearly demonstrated her fitness as a mother, and her recent marriage provides additional stability for the child. Mr. Patterson, you will be granted supervised visitation rights 4 hours every other Saturday to be arranged through the court. This arrangement will be reviewed in 1 year, at which time we can discuss expanded visitation if appropriate. Clara had sagged with relief, tears streaming down her face. Daniel had wrapped his arms around her, holding her as she shook with the force of her emotions. "It's over," he had whispered into her hair. "You won. We won." "We," Clara had repeated through her tears. "I like the sound of that." Outside the courthouse, Jake had confronted them one last time. "This isn't over, Clara. I'm his father, whether you like it or not." "No," Daniel had said firmly, stepping protectively in front of his wife. "You're his sperm donor. Fathers show up. Fathers put their children first. Fathers don't abandon their families when things get tough." Jake had looked like he wanted to throw a punch, but the presence of courthouse security had kept him in check. "You think your money makes you better than me?" "I think my commitment to this family makes me better than you," Daniel had replied. "Money has nothing to do with it." As they had driven home, Tommy sleeping peacefully in his car seat, Clara had been unusually quiet. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel had asked. "I'm thinking about how you called us your family in there, in front of everyone." "Because that's what we are." Clara had turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "When we started this, I thought it was just a business arrangement, but it doesn't feel like business anymore." "No," Daniel had agreed softly. "It doesn't. So what does it feel like?" Daniel had considered his answer carefully, knowing that this moment was important, that his words could change everything between them. "It feels like home," he had said finally. "For the first time in my life, it feels like I'm going home instead of just going to a place where I sleep." Clara had been quiet for the rest of the drive, but when they had arrived at the penthouse, she had reached over and squeezed his hand. "Thank you," she had said, "for everything, for saving us." "You saved me first," Daniel had reminded her. "On that sidewalk, remember?" "That was CPR. This is different." "Is it?" Clara had smiled, and for the first time since their wedding day, Daniel had allowed himself to hope that maybe eventually their arrangement might become something more. That night, as he lay in bed listening to Clara sing Tommy to sleep down the hall, Daniel had realized that somewhere along the way, his feelings had shifted from gratitude to something deeper, something more dangerous. He was falling in love with his wife, and he had no idea what to do about it. The realization hit Daniel like a second heart attack, just as sudden and just as life-altering. He was in love with Clara. Not the convenient affection of their arrangement, not the gratitude-tinged friendship they'd built over coffee and shared custody victories, but real bone-deep change, everything love. And he had absolutely no idea what to do with that knowledge. It had been 6 weeks since the custody hearing, 6 weeks of playing house in a way that felt increasingly less like playing and more like living. Clara had settled into the penthouse with surprising ease, transforming the sterile space into something that actually felt like a home. Tommy's toys appeared in corners, Clara's books found their way onto Daniel's shelves, and the kitchen, once a showpiece Daniel rarely used, became the heart of their small family. The morning everything shifted started like any other. Daniel was in his study reviewing quarterly reports when he heard Clara's laughter echoing from the living room. Not her polite social laugh or her nervous giggle, but the full-throated, uninhibited sound she made when Tommy did something particularly adorable. Unable to resist, Daniel abandoned his spreadsheets and went to investigate. What he found stopped him cold in the doorway. Clara was sitting cross-legged on the Persian rug, still in her pajamas, her hair falling in waves around her shoulders. Tommy was on his hands and knees, rocking back and forth with intense concentration, clearly on the verge of crawling for the first time. Clara was encouraging him with animated expressions and silly voices, completely absorbed in the moment. "Come on, baby boy," she was saying, wiggling a colorful toy just out of Tommy's reach. "You can do it. Come to Mama." Tommy lunged forward, managing to move his hands, but not quite coordinating his knees. He toppled over with a surprised expression that made Clara laugh again, and Daniel felt his chest tighten with an emotion so intense it was almost painful. This was what love looked like. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but a woman in rumpled pajamas cheering for her baby's first attempts at mobility. And Daniel wanted to be part of it so desperately it actually hurt. "How long has he been trying?" Daniel asked softly, not wanting to break the spell, but unable to stay silent. Clara looked up, her face lighting up when she saw him. "About 20 minutes. I think he's getting close." "Can I?" Daniel hesitated, suddenly unsure of his place in this moment. "Would it be okay if I watched?" "Of course." Clara's smile was warm and inviting. "Come sit with us." Daniel settled onto the rug beside her, close enough to smell her shampoo, close enough to notice the way the morning light brought out gold flecks in her green eyes. Tommy, encouraged by the additional audience, redoubled his efforts. "He's determined," Daniel observed, watching the baby's intense focus. "He gets that from me," Clara said with a laugh. "Once I set my mind to something, I'm impossible to stop." "Is that how you ended up saving my life?" Determination. Clara turned to look at him, and something in her expression grew serious. "No, that was instinct. But staying in your life afterward, letting you help us, marrying you." She paused, searching for the right words. "That was determination, and maybe a little bit of faith." "Faith in what?" "In you, in us. In the idea that sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places." Before Daniel could respond, Tommy suddenly coordinated his movements and crawled 3 wobbly steps forward, collapsing in a triumphant heap when he reached his toy. "Oh my God!" Clara squealed, scooping Tommy into her arms. "You did it! You crawled! Daniel, did you see? He crawled!" "I saw," Daniel said, his voice rougher than he'd intended. "He was amazing." Clara was beaming, pressing kisses to Tommy's head while the baby babbled happily. In her excitement, she turned to Daniel, and for one heart-stopping moment, he thought she might kiss him too. Their faces were inches apart, her eyes bright with joy, and Daniel felt the pull between them like gravity. But then Clara seemed to realize how close they were, and she pulled back slightly, the moment dissolving into awkward awareness. I should call Mrs. Chen," she said, her cheeks pink. "She'll want to know about his first crawl." "Of course," Daniel agreed, though what he really wanted was to pull her back, to close that distance between them, and find out if her lips were as soft as they looked. Instead, he watched her stand and carry Tommy toward the kitchen, chattering to the baby about his achievement. And Daniel was left sitting on the rug, surrounded by toys, wondering when exactly his convenient marriage had become the most important thing in his life. That afternoon, while Clara was napping and Tommy was playing in his high chair, Daniel's assistant called with news that would change everything. "Sir," Jennifer's voice was tight with barely contained excitement. "I just got off the phone with the mayor's office. They're announcing the nominees for the Humanitarian of the Year award tomorrow, and you're on the list." Daniel paused in feeding Tommy his afternoon snack. "I'm sorry, what?" "The Humanitarian Award. Apparently, someone nominated you for your work with the Children's Hospital Foundation. The ceremony is next Friday night, black tie, very prestigious. The governor will be there, several celebrities, all the city's major philanthropists. Daniel felt his stomach drop. The Children's Hospital Foundation was something he'd supported quietly for years, but he'd never sought recognition for it. He had a feeling he knew exactly who had submitted his name. Jennifer, I need you to find out who made the nomination. Already did. It was your board member, Charles Brennan. He said it was time you got the recognition you deserved. Of course it was Charles. The man had been pushing Daniel to raise his public profile for years, arguing that visibility was good for business. This was exactly the kind of high society event that Daniel normally avoided, like the plague. Sir, should I RSVP that you'll attend? Daniel looked at Tommy, who was happily smearing banana across his tray, and thought about Clara. I'll get back to you. That evening, over dinner, Daniel broke the news to Clara. A humanitarian award, she said, pausing with her fork halfway to her mouth. Daniel, that's incredible. You must be so proud. I'm not sure I deserve it, Daniel said honestly. I write checks. Other people do the actual work. Don't minimize what you do. Those checks probably fund programs that help hundreds of children. Maybe. But Clara, there's something else. The ceremony is very public, high profile. There will be photographers, society reporters, people who will be very interested in my personal life. Understanding dawned in Clara's eyes. You're worried about people asking questions about our marriage. I'm worried about people being cruel to you, Daniel said bluntly. Some of these people can be judgmental about anyone they perceive as an outsider. Clara set down her fork, her expression thoughtful. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying you don't have to come. I can make excuses, say you're not feeling well. Daniel. Clara's voice was sharp enough to cut through his rambling. Are you embarrassed by me? What? No, God, no, Clara. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? Daniel ran his hands through his hair, frustrated by his inability to explain the complexities of his world without sounding like a snob. It's about protecting you. These people can be vicious when they want to be. They'll look at you and see someone who doesn't belong, and they'll say things designed to make you feel small. And you think I can't handle that? I think you shouldn't have to. Clara was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. What if I want to come? What if I want to support my husband at an important event? My husband. The words sent warmth spiraling through Daniel's chest, even as he worried about what the evening might cost them. Are you sure? I'm sure. Clara's smile was determined. Besides, I've never been to a fancy charity gala. It might be fun. Daniel had serious doubts about how fun it would be, but he found himself nodding. Okay. But we do this together as a team. If anyone says anything that makes you uncomfortable, we leave. No arguments. Deal. The next week passed in a flurry of preparation. Clara, with characteristic practicality, had insisted on finding her own dress, despite Daniel's offers to hire a personal shopper. She returned from her expedition with a simple black gown that had probably cost less than most of the other attendees would spend on accessories. But when she emerged from her bedroom on the night of the gala, Daniel forgot how to breathe. The dress was elegant in its simplicity, fitted through the bodice and flowing to the floor. Clara had pinned her hair up in a style that showcased the graceful line of her neck, and she wore the only jewelry she owned, small pearl earrings that had been her mother's. Will I do? She asked, smoothing her hands nervously over the skirt. You're perfect, Daniel said, meaning it completely. Clara, you're absolutely perfect. A soft smile crossed her face. You clean up pretty well yourself. Daniel was wearing his best tuxedo, but he felt underdressed next to his wife's natural elegance. Ready for this, as ready as I'll ever be. The ballroom of the Grand Plaza Hotel was everything Daniel had expected: crystal chandeliers, gilded walls, and enough diamonds to fund a small country. Clara's eyes widened as they entered, taking in the opulence with obvious awe. "This is incredible," she whispered. "It's a lot." Daniel agreed, placing his hand protectively on the small of her back as they moved through the crowd. The first hour went smoothly. Daniel introduced Clara to colleagues and acquaintances, most of whom were polite if not particularly warm. Clara handled herself beautifully, making appropriate conversation and asking thoughtful questions about the various charities being honored. It was when they approached the bar that things began to go wrong. "Daniel Whitmore," a familiar voice called out. "I was hoping you'd be here tonight." Daniel turned to find Victoria Sterling, a woman he'd dated briefly 2 years ago. She was everything Clara wasn't: tall, blonde, dripping with inherited wealth, and barely concealed malice. "Victoria," Daniel said carefully, "how are you? Wonderful, darling. And this must be the famous wife." Victoria's smile was sharp as she looked Clara up and down. "How fascinating. I heard about your whirlwind romance." Clara extended her hand. "I'm Clara. It's nice to meet you." Victoria shook Clara's hand briefly, her gaze calculating. "Clara, such a simple name. And what did you say you do for work?" "I didn't," Clara replied smoothly. "But I work in food service." "How quaint." Victoria's tone made it clear that quaint was not a compliment. "And you have a child, I understand, from a previous relationship." Daniel felt his jaw clench. "Victoria." "It's fine," Clara said quietly, though Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders. "Yes, I have a son, Tommy. He's 10 months old." "How lovely, and Daniel, you're playing stepfather. How generous of you." "Tommy is my son," Daniel said firmly, "in every way that matters." Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Of course he is. Tell me, Clara, are you enjoying the lifestyle upgrade? It must be quite an adjustment from— Where did you say you lived before?" Clara's cheeks flushed, but her voice remained steady. "We lived in a small apartment. And yes, Daniel's home is beautiful. Tommy loves having space to play." "I'm sure he does. And you must love having someone to take care of you financially. No more worrying about bills or rent. How convenient that Daniel had his little heart episode right when you happened to be there." The implication was clear, and Daniel felt his temper snap. "That's enough, Victoria." But Victoria wasn't finished. "I'm just saying it's remarkable how some people have such good timing. Save a rich man's life, end up with a ring and a trust fund. Quite the fairy tale." Clara went very still beside him, and Daniel could practically feel her withdrawing. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I need some air." She walked away before Daniel could stop her, moving quickly toward the terrace doors. Daniel turned back to Victoria, his eyes blazing. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Victoria shrugged, unrepentant. "I'm just looking out for you, darling. She's obviously a gold digger. Anyone with eyes can see it. The only thing anyone with eyes can see is that you're a bitter, jealous woman who can't stand seeing someone else happy." Daniel's voice was low and dangerous. "Stay away from my wife, Victoria. I mean it." He left her standing by the bar and went after Clara, finding her on the terrace overlooking the city. She was gripping the railing, her knuckles white in the moonlight. "Clara." She didn't turn around. "She's right, you know, about how it looks. She's not right about anything." "Isn't she?" Clara's voice was small. Poor single mother saves rich man's life, ends up married to him 6 months later. It does sound like a fairy tale, or a con game. Daniel moved to stand beside her, close enough to touch, but not quite touching. Is that what you think this is, a con game? I don't know what this is anymore. Clara finally looked at him, and Daniel was gutted by the uncertainty in her eyes. When we started this, it was simple, a business arrangement to help me keep Tommy. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like business. Would that be such a terrible thing? Clara was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the glittering cityscape. Do you know what the worst part is? For just a minute in there, I forgot that I don't belong in your world. I was actually enjoying myself, feeling like maybe I could fit in. And then she reminded me of exactly what I am. And what's that? A charity case. Someone you rescued out of pity. Daniel turned to face her fully, his hands gripping the railing. Clara, look at me. Reluctantly, she met his eyes. You are not a charity case. You are not someone I rescued out of pity. You are the strongest, most amazing woman I've ever known, and I am honored to call you my wife. But she's not wrong about the timing, is she? About how convenient it all was. Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. Do you want to know what I think about timing? Clara nodded. I think the universe has a sick sense of humor. I think it waited until I was 32 years old and completely convinced I was better off alone before it put you in my path. I think it gave me a heart attack on the one corner in the entire city where the woman I was meant to find would be driving by. And I think it's been laughing at us ever since, watching us try to pretend this is just a convenient arrangement when anyone with eyes can see we're falling in love. Clara's breath caught. Daniel, I'm in love with you, Clara. The words tumbled out before he could stop them, 3 months of suppressed feelings finally breaking free. I didn't plan it. I didn't want it. And I sure as hell don't deserve it. But I am completely, hopelessly in love with you. Clara stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. You can't be. Why not? Because this was supposed to be pretend. Because we agreed it was just for Tommy's security. Because you're scared, Daniel finished gently. I get it, Clara. I'm terrified too. But that doesn't make it less real. Daniel, Clara's voice broke. I can't do this. Not here, not like this. Then where, when? Because I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is just friendship. Clara closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they were bright with unshed tears. I need to think. I need time to figure out what this means. Take all the time you need, Daniel said softly. But Clara, whatever you decide, whatever happens between us, I want you to know that marrying you was the best decision I've ever made. Not because it was convenient or practical, but because it brought you and Tommy into my life. You've made me happier than I ever thought possible. A tear slipped down Clara's cheek, and Daniel reached up to brush it away with his thumb. For a moment, they stood frozen in that position, his hand cupping her face, her eyes searching his. We should go back inside, Clara whispered. They're probably about to announce the awards. Daniel nodded reluctantly, dropping his hand. Are you sure you're ready? No, but I'm here and I'm your wife, and I'm not going to let people like Victoria Sterling chase me away. Daniel felt his heart swell with pride. That's my girl. They returned to the ballroom together, Clara's hand tucked into the crook of Daniel's arm. When his name was called as the winner of the Humanitarian of the Year award, Clara was the first person to applaud, her smile radiant with genuine joy for his achievement. During his acceptance speech, Daniel looked out over the crowd and found Clara's face in the sea of strangers. She was watching him with such warmth and pride that he almost forgot his prepared remarks. "This award," he said, his eyes never leaving hers, "belongs to everyone who believes that we have a responsibility to take care of each other. Family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to show up, to be present, to love unconditionally. I've learned that recently, and it's changed everything about how I see the world." The applause was thunderous, but Daniel barely heard it. All his attention was focused on Clara, who was wiping tears from her eyes and mouthing, "I'm proud of you." Later, as they rode home in the back of his car, Clara was unusually quiet. "Penny for your thoughts," Daniel said softly. Clara turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "I was thinking about what you said in your speech, about choosing to show up. What about it? You've been showing up for Tommy and me since the day we met. Not because you had to, but because you chose to. And I've been so focused on protecting myself that I haven't been choosing anything. I've just been surviving." Daniel waited, sensing she had more to say. "I want to choose Daniel. I want to stop being scared and start living. But I need you to know that if we do this, if we turn this marriage into something real, it has to be all or nothing. I can't be your convenient wife anymore. I can't pretend that what I feel for you is just gratitude." Daniel's heart stopped. "What do you feel for me?" Clara smiled, and it was like sunrise after the longest night. "I love you too. I think I have for weeks, but I was too scared to admit it. Too afraid that someone like me couldn't possibly be enough for someone like you." "Clara," Daniel reached for her hands, his own shaking with relief and joy. "You're not just enough. You're everything. Even when I embarrass you at fancy parties, you didn't embarrass me. You were perfect. And anyone who can't see how incredible you are isn't worth knowing anyway." Clara laughed through her tears. "So what happens now?" "Now we go home to our son and figure out how to be a real family." "Our son," Clara repeated, testing the words. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." As their car pulled into the parking garage beneath the penthouse, Clara leaned over and kissed Daniel softly. It was different from their chaste wedding kiss, deeper, full of promise and possibility. "I love you, Daniel Whitmore," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too, Clara Whitmore," he replied. And finally, everything felt exactly as it should be. Upstairs, Mrs. Chen met them at the door with a sleeping Tommy in her arms. "He was an angel," she whispered carefully, transferring the baby to Clara. "But I think he missed his mama and papa." "Papa." Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion as he looked down at the child who had brought him and Clara together. After Mrs. Chen left, they stood together in the nursery, watching Tommy sleep peacefully in his crib. "He's going to have such a good life," Clara murmured, her hand finding Daniel's in the dim light. "We all are," Daniel replied, and for the first time in his life he believed it completely. They had found each other against all odds, built a family from the pieces of their broken hearts, and learned that love didn't always look like the fairy tales. Sometimes it looked like a woman in a delivery van who refused to let a stranger die. Sometimes it looked like a man who chose to show up day after day until showing up became loving. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, love looked like standing in a nursery at midnight, holding hands with the person who had saved your life in more ways than one, watching your child sleep and knowing that tomorrow would be even better than today. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities neither of them had dared to imagine 6 months ago. There would be challenges, certainly there always were, but they would face them together as a family, as partners who had chosen each other not out of convenience or desperation, but out of love. Real, messy, complicated, beautiful love. And that made all the difference. The months that followed, their declaration of love unfolded like pages in a book neither of them had dared to write. What had begun as a marriage of convenience transformed into something deeper, richer, more complex than either Clara or Daniel had imagined possible. They learned each other's rhythms, discovered the small intimacies that make a house a home, and built a foundation strong enough to weather any storm. Tommy took his first steps on a Tuesday morning in May, tottering from Clara's outstretched arms directly into Daniel's waiting embrace. The moment was so perfect, so naturally choreographed, that it felt like the universe's way of putting its stamp of approval on their unconventional family. "Did you see that?" Clara laughed, tears streaming down her face as Daniel scooped Tommy up and spun him around. "He walked, our baby walked, our baby." Daniel repeated the words, still sending warmth through his chest every time he heard them. "God. Clara, did you see his face? He was so proud of himself." Tommy babbled happily in Daniel's arms, clapping his hands together in the gesture that had become his signature celebration. Clara moved to join them, creating a small circle of our arms and laughter and pure joy. "We need to call Mrs. Chen," Clara said, wiping her eyes. "And Maria, and Dr. Harrison, and everyone we've ever met." "Or," Daniel said softly, pressing a kiss to her temple, "we could just stand here for a minute and be amazed by what we've created." Clara looked up at him, her green eyes bright with happiness. "What we've created. This. Us. This family that shouldn't work, but somehow does." Daniel shifted Tommy to one arm so he could cup Clara's face with his free hand. "I wake up every morning still surprised that this is my life. Good surprised or bad surprised. The best kind of surprised. The kind that makes me believe in miracles." Clara stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, and Tommy chose that moment to grab a handful of each of their hair, pulling them closer together with a delighted squeal. They broke apart laughing, and Daniel thought that if this was what heaven looked like, he could understand why people spent their whole lives trying to get there. Summer brought new challenges and deeper connections. Daniel taught Tommy to play in the sprinklers on the penthouse terrace, while Clara watched from the shade, her hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her belly. The pregnancy had been a surprise, a wonderful, terrifying, life-changing surprise that had sent them both into a tailspin of emotions. "Are you sure about this?" Clara had asked when the pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines. They were sitting on their bathroom floor at 6 in the morning, still in their pajamas, staring at the little plastic stick like it might change its mind. "Are you asking if I'm sure I want another child with you?" Daniel had replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Because the answer is yes. Absolutely yes. Are you asking if I'm sure we're ready? Because I have no idea, but I don't think anyone ever really is." Clara had been quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the test. "I'm scared," she'd admitted. "With Tommy, I didn't have a choice. It was just me, and I had to figure it out. But now we have this life we've built, and what if a new baby changes everything?" "It will change everything," Daniel had said gently. "But Clara, we've gotten pretty good at handling change. We've built something strong enough to grow with. What if I'm not a good enough mother to 2 children? What if I can't give them both what they need?" Daniel had pulled her into his arms, holding her while she cried tears of fear and joy and overwhelming possibility. "You're going to be an amazing mother to both of them. And more importantly, you're not going to be doing it alone this time." Now, watching Daniel blow bubbles for Tommy, while carefully avoiding the areas where Clara was resting, she marveled at how naturally fatherhood had come to him. He had thrown himself into learning everything about child development, reading parenting books, with the same intensity he'd once reserved for quarterly reports. "Uncle Daniel is getting pretty good at this daddy thing," Clara murmured to her belly, her hands making gentle circles over the bump. "Your brother adores him. You're going to love him too." As if responding to her voice, the baby gave a strong kick, and Clara gasped softly. "Everything okay?" Daniel called from across the terrace, immediately alert to any sign of distress. "Everything's perfect," Clara replied, gesturing for him to come over. "Someone wants to say hello." Daniel settled beside her on the lounge chair, placing his hand over hers on her belly. They waited, and after a moment, the baby kicked again, directly into Daniel's palm. "Hello there, little one," Daniel whispered, his face soft with wonder. "We can't wait to meet you." Tommy, not to be outdone by his siblings' performance, tottered over and patted Clara's belly with both hands, babbling something that sounded like baby, but could have been maybe or gravy for all they could understand. "Yes, sweetheart," Clara laughed. "There's a baby in there. Your little sister." The gender had been revealed at their last ultrasound, and Daniel had cried actual tears when the technician pointed out the tiny features on the screen. A daughter. He was going to have a daughter who would hopefully have Clara's eyes and stubborn streak and generous heart. "Have you thought any more about names?" Daniel asked, his hand still resting on Clara's belly. "I have some ideas," Clara said carefully. "But I want to run them by you first." "Hit me." Clara took a breath, suddenly nervous. "What would you think about Rosemarie after my mother?" Daniel was quiet for so long that Clara began to worry he hated it. Then he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Rosemarie Whitmore. It's perfect, Clara. Absolutely perfect." "Really? Really? And Marie was your mother's middle name? Her first name, Marie Rose Evans. I thought maybe we could flip it, give the baby a piece of her, but still make it her own." Daniel leaned over and kissed Clara softly. "I love it. I love you. I love our expanding family and our complicated life and every single unexpected thing that brought us here. Even your heart attack. Especially my heart attack. Best thing that ever happened to me." Clara laughed, shaking her head. "Only you would say getting a heart attack was lucky. Not the heart attack itself, but everything that came after. You taught me this life we've built. All of it started with you refusing to let me die on that sidewalk. And look where it got us." Clara mused, gesturing around the terrace at Tommy playing happily with his toys at the city spread out below them like a promise. Exactly where we're supposed to be. August brought Jake's first supervised visit with Tommy, an event that had filled Clara with anxiety for weeks beforehand. She had spent hours with their lawyer going over every detail of the arrangement, making sure she understood her rights and Tommy's protections. "What if he tries to turn Tommy against us?" she'd worried to Daniel the night before. "What if he tells him lies about why we're not together? Tommy's not even 2 years old, sweetheart. He's not going to understand complex explanations about relationships. And even if Jake tried something like that, kids know who loves them. Tommy knows we're his family. I just don't want him to be confused." Daniel had pulled her close, his hands gentle on her now prominent belly. "He won't be. We'll make sure of that. And Clara, if Jake does anything at all that makes you uncomfortable, we end the visit immediately. The court order is very clear about that." The visit itself had been awkward but manageable. Jake, perhaps chastened by his legal defeat, or genuinely wanting to reconnect with his son, had been on his best behavior. He'd brought age-appropriate toys, stuck to the supervised activities, and hadn't made any snide comments about Clara or Daniel's marriage. Tommy, for his part, had been politely curious about this stranger who claimed to be his daddy, but had shown none of the immediate bonding that Jake had clearly hoped for. When the 4 hours were up, Tommy had reached for Clara without hesitation, settling comfortably into her familiar embrace. "How did it go?" Daniel had asked when Clara returned home, studying her face for signs of distress. "Better than I expected," Clara had admitted. "He was actually decent. Still not father material in my opinion, but he didn't try to cause drama." "And how's Tommy?" Clara had looked down at their son, who was already engrossed in playing with a toy Daniel had given him that morning. "He's fine. A little confused maybe, but fine. He kept looking around like he was wondering where you were. He was..." When Jake tried to get him to play catch, Tommy kept throwing the ball toward the door and saying, "Dada, I think he wanted you to come play too." Daniel had felt his heart do that thing it always did when Tommy called him Dada, a combination of overwhelming love and fierce protectiveness that still surprised him with its intensity. "Maybe next time I should go with you," he'd suggested. "The court order says, I know what it says, but it doesn't say I can't be in the building. Maybe having me nearby would make everyone more comfortable." Clara had smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "You want to protect us?" "Always. Both of you. All three of you," he'd added, placing his hand on her belly. "I love you, Daniel Whitmore." "I love you too, Clara Whitmore. More than I ever thought possible." September brought the most unexpected visitor of all. Clara was in the nursery folding tiny pink clothes and arranging them in the dresser they'd bought for Rose when the doorman called to announce that someone was there to see her. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's a woman here who says she's your sister. Should I send her up?" Clara nearly dropped the onesie she was holding. "My sister..." "Yes, ma'am. Says her name is Sarah Evans." Clara's heart stopped. Sarah, her older sister who had disappeared into drugs and bad relationships when Clara was 16. The sister she hadn't spoken to in over 5 years, who had missed their mother's funeral, who Clara had assumed was either dead or wanted nothing to do with family. "Send her up." Clara managed her voice barely a whisper. Daniel emerged from his study when he heard Clara pacing in the living room, her hands pressed to her belly in the protective gesture she'd developed. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. "My sister is here. Sarah. I haven't seen her in 5 years, Daniel. I don't even know how she found me. Do you want me to stay, or would you prefer to see her alone?" Clara considered this, then reached for his hand. "Stay. Please, I might need backup." And when Sarah knocked on the door, Clara took a deep breath and opened it to find a woman who looked like a cleaned-up version of her worst fears. Sarah was thin but not gaunt. Her hair was clean and styled, and her clothes were simple but neat. She looked like someone who had climbed out of a very deep hole and was still getting used to the sunlight. "Clara," Sarah said softly, her voice full of emotion. "Oh my God, look at you. You're pregnant." "Sarah." Clara's voice was carefully neutral. "What are you doing here?" "I've been clean for 8 months, Sarah said without preamble. 8 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. I'm in a program, I have a sponsor, and I'm trying to make amends to the people I hurt. You're at the top of that list." Clara stared at her sister, searching for signs of deception, for the hollow look that had characterized Sarah's eyes during her worst years. But what she saw instead was genuine remorse and hard-won sobriety. "How did you find me?" "I saw your picture in the newspaper, the society page after some charity thing. Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Whitmore," Sarah recited. "I couldn't believe it was you, but there you were looking beautiful and happy and married to one of the richest men in the city." Clara felt Daniel's presence behind her, solid and reassuring. "Sarah, this is my husband Daniel. Daniel, this is my sister Sarah." Daniel stepped forward, extending his hand. "Nice to meet you, Sarah." Sarah shook his hand, her eyes wide. I can't believe my little sister married a CEO. Though knowing Clara, she probably saved your life or something equally heroic. Daniel and Clara exchanged a look, and Sarah caught it. Oh my God, she did, didn't she? She actually saved your life. She did, Daniel confirmed. In more ways than one. Sarah laughed, shaking her head. That's so Clara, always taking care of everyone else. An awkward silence fell, and Clara found herself torn between the urge to slam the door and the desire to invite her sister in for coffee. 8 months clean was good, but Sarah had been clean before. The longest stretch had been almost a year, and then she'd disappeared with Clara's emergency fund and their mother's jewelry. I don't want money, Sarah said, as if reading Clara's thoughts. And I'm not here to ask for a place to stay or any kind of favor. I just wanted to see you, to tell you I'm sorry for missing Mom's funeral, for stealing from you, for being a terrible sister when you needed me most. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Sarah, I know I can't undo any of it. I know sorry doesn't fix the damage I caused, but I had to try to make it right even if it's too late. Clara looked at her sister, really looked at her, and saw something she hadn't seen in years. Hope. Real, fragile, hard-earned hope. It's not too late, Clara said quietly. It's not too late for anything. She stepped aside, gesturing for Sarah to come in. Would you like some coffee? I was just about to make some. Sarah's face crumpled with relief. I would love some coffee. As they sat in the living room, Sarah admired Tommy, who was napping in his playpen, and marveled at the changes in Clara's life. You look happy, Sarah observed. Really genuinely happy. I don't think I've seen you look like this since before Dad left. I am happy, Clara confirmed. It took a while to get here, but yes, I'm happy. And you're having another baby. A girl, Rosemarie. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. After Mom. After Mom. She would be so proud of you, Clara. So proud of the woman you've become, the family you've built. She would be proud of you too for getting clean, for trying to make things right. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I have a long way to go. My sponsor says I'll be making amends for the rest of my life, but it feels good to start. Where are you living now? Sober living house about an hour upstate. I work at a diner, nothing fancy, but it's honest work, and they don't mind that I have a record. Daniel, who had been quietly listening to the sisters reconnect, spoke up. What kind of work did you do before? Before the drugs, I was actually pretty good with computers. Programming basic IT stuff. But that was a long time ago. The field changes fast, but the fundamentals are the same. If you're interested in getting back into it, I might know some people who could help. Sarah stared at him. You would do that for me? For Clara's sister, yes. Everyone deserves a second chance. Clara felt her heart swell with love for her husband. He was always doing this, finding ways to help, to lift people up, to make things better without making a big deal about it. I should go, Sarah said after they'd talked for another hour. I don't want to overstay my welcome. You're not, Clara said, but I understand if you have to get back. At the door, Sarah hesitated. Clara, would it be okay if I stayed in touch? I know I have to earn your trust back, but I'd like to try. I'd like that too, Clara said, and meant it. After Sarah left, Clara and Daniel sat together on the couch, processing the unexpected visit. Are you okay? Daniel asked, his arm around her shoulders. I think so. It's just, I've spent so many years being angry with her. And then suddenly, she's here looking healthy and sober, and all that anger just sort of evaporated. That's what love does. It endures even when everything else falls apart. Do you think she'll stay clean this time? I don't know, Daniel said honestly. But I think she has a better chance now than she's ever had before. She has something to fight for. What's that? You. The possibility of being part of this family again. That's worth fighting for. Clara nestled closer to Daniel, her hand finding his on her belly. You know what I love about you. What? You always see the best in people, even when they haven't earned it. I learned that from you, Daniel said softly. You saw the best in me when I was just a stranger on a sidewalk. You were never just a stranger. From the moment I saw you fall, you were mine to save. And you were mine to love, even if it took me a while to figure that out. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the afternoon light fade over the city, each lost in their own thoughts about the strange turns life could take. Neither of them could have imagined that day on the sidewalk almost a year ago that they would end up here married, expecting their second child, building a life that was messy and complicated and absolutely perfect. October brought Rosemarie Whitmore into the world at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, after 18 hours of labor that had left Clara exhausted but triumphant. Daniel had been by her side through every contraction, holding her hand and whispering encouragement when she was sure she couldn't do it anymore. She's perfect, Daniel breathed, cradling his daughter for the first time. Clara, she's absolutely perfect. Rose was perfect, tiny and wrinkled and red-faced with a cap of dark hair and her father's strong chin. She had Clara's nose and what the nurses assured them would probably be Clara's green eyes, though they were too unfocused to tell for certain. Can I hold her? Clara asked, exhausted, but desperate to have her daughter in her arms. Daniel carefully transferred the baby, and Clara felt that same overwhelming rush of love she'd experienced when Tommy was born. But this time, it was different. This time she wasn't alone and scared and wondering how she would manage. This time she had a partner who was looking at their daughter like she'd hung the moon and stars. Hi, baby girl, Clara whispered, touching Rose's tiny hand. We've been waiting for you. Rose's eyes fluttered open for just a moment, unfocused, but somehow seeming to look directly at her mother. Then she yawned a perfect little sound and settled back into sleep. Should we call everyone? Daniel asked. In a minute, Clara said. I just want to look at her for a minute longer. When Tommy met his sister later that day, his reaction was everything Clara had hoped for and more. He approached the hospital bed cautiously, his eyes wide with curiosity. Baby, he said, pointing at the tiny bundle in Clara's arms. Yes, sweetheart. This is your baby sister, Rose. Can you say Rose, woes? Tommy attempted, and everyone in the room melted a little. That's right, Tommy. Rose. She's going to need you to be a big brother and help take care of her. Tommy nodded solemnly, then reached out to gently pat the baby's head. Rose stirred at the touch, opening her eyes for just a moment, and Tommy gasped with delight. She likes me, he announced. She loves you, Clara corrected, just like we all do. Daniel watched his family with a sense of completion he'd never experienced before. This was what he'd been missing his whole life without even knowing it, this chaos of love and noise and tiny hands reaching for him. This belonging. Daddy, Tommy said, tugging on Daniel's sleeve. Hold, baby. You want to hold her? Daniel asked, and when Tommy nodded eagerly, Daniel carefully arranged him in the chair and helped him support Rose's head. Just like that, buddy. You're doing great. Tommy beamed with pride, looking down at his sister with the serious expression he reserved for very important tasks. Good brother, he announced to the room. The best brother. Clara agreed, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Later that evening, when visiting hours were over, and it was just the four of them, Daniel sat beside Clara's bed with Rose sleeping in his arms and Tommy curled up next to his mother. "This is nice," Clara said softly. "All of us together." "This is everything," Daniel corrected. "Clara, I need you to know something." "What?" "A year ago, I thought my life was complete. I had my company, my penthouse, my routine. I thought I had everything I needed. But I was just existing, not living. You didn't just save my life that day on the sidewalk, you gave me a life worth living." Clara reached for his free hand. "You saved me too, you know. I was drowning before I met you, just trying to keep my head above water. You gave me hope that things could be better. And now I can't imagine my life without you. Any of this. Our beautiful, crazy, imperfect family." Daniel leaned over to kiss her, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby in his arms. "I love you, Clara Whitmore." "I love you too, Daniel Whitmore." Tommy, not wanting to be left out, piped up with "Love you too," making them both laugh. "And we love you, Tommy," Clara said, kissing the top of his head. "All of us together." As they sat there in the soft light of the hospital room, their daughter sleeping peacefully, and their son chattering quietly about all the things he wanted to show his baby sister, Daniel marveled at the journey that had brought them here. It hadn't been the love story he'd imagined as a young man, no lightning bolts, no dramatic declarations, no perfectly orchestrated romance. Instead, it had been built on something much stronger choice. The choice to save a stranger's life. The choice to help when help was needed. The choice to trust, to hope, to love even when love seemed impossible. They had chosen each other again and again in 1,000 small moments. And that choosing had created something beautiful. A family that looked nothing like the traditional ideal, but felt exactly right for all of them. "Ready to go home tomorrow?" Daniel asked. "More than ready," Clara replied. "Though I have a feeling our quiet mornings are about to become a thing of the past." "Good," Daniel said, surprising her. "I was getting tired of quiet anyway." Clara laughed, the sound bright and full of joy. "Just wait until she starts teething." "Bring it on. I'm not scared of a little chaos." "Famous last words," Clara teased. "Maybe, but I'd rather have chaos with you than peace without you." "That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said to me." "I'm just getting started, Mrs. Whitmore. We have the rest of our lives for me to get romantic." "The rest of our lives," Clara repeated, testing the words. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." Outside the hospital window, the city sparkled in the darkness, full of millions of other stories, other lives intersecting in ways that would change everything. Somewhere out there, another person was making a choice that would ripple through time. Somewhere another life was being swallowed. Another family was being born. Another love story was beginning with the simplest decision to stop and help when help was needed. But here in this room, their story was complete in the way that good stories are not because it was over, but because it had found its rhythm, its purpose, its heart. Daniel and Clara had learned that love wasn't always grand gestures and sweeping music. Sometimes it was as simple as learning CPR, as practical as signing marriage papers, as everyday as choosing to show up. They had built their family on the foundation of that first moment when Clara had refused to let a stranger die. And from that one act of courage, of compassion, of simple human decency, had grown something neither of them could have imagined: a love that was real, a family that was whole, and a future that stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility. Tommy fell asleep against his mother's side, and Rose stirred just enough to make the tiny sounds that newborns make. Daniel and Clara looked at each other over their sleeping children, and in that look was everything they needed to say. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for saving mine. Thank you for choosing us, choosing this, choosing love, even when it was hard and uncertain and nothing like what we planned. And as the night settled around them, the four of them together, in their imperfect, beautiful bubble of love, Daniel thought about the inscription he'd had engraved inside Clara's wedding ring, the words that had seemed so simple when he'd chosen them, but now felt like prophecy. One breath changed us. One breath, one moment, one choice to save a life instead of walking past. And from that single breath, everything else had followed. Love, family, hope, healing, and the kind of happiness that only comes when you stop trying to control your story and let it write itself. Clara had given him back his breath that day on the sidewalk, and in return, he had given her a life where she never had to hold her breath again. It was, Daniel thought, as he watched his wife and children sleep, the best trade he'd ever made.